Be me. I am the senior community liaison for Oakhaven Estates, a sprawling, supposedly exclusive gated community built on what used to be old money horse farms. My job is to maintain the delicate balance between the original residents, who have been here for decades, and the influx of new wealth buying up the larger lots. I manage the bylaws, the aesthetics, the compliance. I know every loophole, every grandfathered exception, every single line item in the original development agreement. My role is to be the buffer, the problem solver, the one who keeps everything running smoothly and legally. Be not me. Sterling Thorne. He bought the largest, most ostentatious new construction on the highest ridge a year ago. He's a tech venture capitalist, all sharp suits and even sharper elbows. He calls Oakhaven Estates a diamond in the rough, by which he means a place I can mold into my own personal, pristine vision, regardless of who or what was here before. He quickly leveraged his money and influence to get elected to the HOA board, then strong-armed his way into the president's seat. He represents everything I dread: unchecked arrogance, a complete disregard for history or community, and an absolute certainty that his wealth makes him inherently superior. The first incident was Thorne's landscaping vision. He decided the stately, century-old oak trees lining the main boulevard were too rustic and impeded the flow of natural light to his property. He demanded their removal, claiming they violated some vague aesthetic guideline he just drafted. I explained calmly in a board meeting that those trees were protected by a specific conservation easement tied to the original development, a point explicitly outlined in Section 4C Roman 4 of the Master Covenants. Removing them would incur massive fines from the county and violate a state Environmental Protection Act. He just stared at me, then at the other board members. He said, "I don't care what some dusty old paperwork says. We're modernizing. Get me quotes for their removal, liaison. Consider it done." I made a note. I sent him the quotes, along with copies of the relevant county ordinances and state statutes, highlighting the penalty clauses. I attached a memo outlining the likely legal costs and the certainty of a cease and desist from the county. He ignored it all. The trees remained, but his contempt for process was clear. He just expected things to happen because he wanted them to. Then there was the uniform mailbox fiasco. Oakhaven Estates had always allowed residents to choose from a selection of approved, aesthetically varied mailboxes that fit the overall look of their individual homes. Thorne, however, wanted every single mailbox in the entire community to be identical. A sleek, minimalist steel design that looked like something out of a futuristic architectural magazine. He declared the current variety cluttered and lacking cohesion. He pushed through a new bylaw without proper resident notification or a grace period, mandating immediate replacement at resident expense. I spent weeks fielding angry calls from longtime residents, especially the elderly, who simply couldn't afford to replace perfectly functional, aesthetically approved mailboxes just because Thorne wanted uniformity. I presented Thorne with the written complaints. The legal opinion stating the new bylaw was unenforceable without a proper amendment process and a reasonable transition period, and a petition signed by over half the community. His response: "They'll fall in line. Tell them I'll have the old ones removed if they don't comply. We need to project an image of pristine order for our new buyers." I documented every step, every ignored warning, every dismissive wave of his hand. His disdain for the residents was as palpable as his disregard for the rules. The third escalation involved a vendor dispute. We had a long-standing local landscaping company, Green Acres, that had serviced Oakhaven for 20 years. They knew every shrub, every irrigation line, every resident's preferences. Thorne decided Green Acres was not up to the standard he envisioned. He brought in an expensive, out-of-state firm, Veridian Concepts, owned by a college friend of his, without a proper bidding process. I pointed out this violated procurement policy section 7BI, which required 3 competitive bids for contracts over $50,000. He waved me off. Veridian is already contracted. They start next week. I informed him that the board would be in direct violation of our fiduciary duties and the contract would be voidable, likely leading to a lawsuit from Green Acres. He just smiled. Let them sue. We can afford it. Viridian will make this place shine. Viridian Concepts, predictably, ripped out healthy, established plantings, damaged several irrigation systems, and accidentally paved over a small section of a protected wetland area near the old golf course. I documented the damage, the repair costs, and the inevitable county fines that followed. Thorne's response was a shrug and a complaint that I wasn't being a team player. Every incident was a data point, meticulously filed away. The breaking point arrived with Winston. Winston is my service dog, a remarkably intelligent golden retriever. He's trained for mobility assistance and medical alert. He's impeccably behaved, always on leash, and his presence is both a comfort and a necessity for my daily life. He has all necessary certifications, local and state registrations, and medical documentation. I'd had a small, custom-built, aesthetically pleasing dog run for him in my backyard for years, fully permitted and built to code, integrated discreetly into my property line. It allowed him exercise without stress on my joints and was essential for his specific training needs. Thorne decided Winston's run was an eyesore. It was nestled behind mature azaleas, barely visible, constructed from the same materials as my house siding, with a small, discreet roof that matched my home. But Thorne had just pushed through a new, aggressively restrictive, architectural aesthetics overlay, specifically targeting anything he deemed non-conforming or disruptive to the harmonious visual flow of the community. He saw Winston's run as a test case, a visible symbol of an old resident resisting his new order. He sent me a formal notice, citing his new overlay, demanding immediate demolition. I responded with a detailed letter, citing Federal Fair Housing Act protections, state disability accommodation laws, and the specific section of our HOA bylaws that allowed for reasonable accommodations for service animals. I included Winston's full documentation, my doctor's letter, and the original permits for the run. I emphasized that removing it would directly impede my ability to perform my duties, as Winston is integral to my mobility. I ended by stating that I would be happy to discuss minor aesthetic modifications that didn't compromise the run's functionality. Thorne's reply was swift and dismissive. He bypassed me entirely, sending a directive straight to the community maintenance team, authorizing them to forcibly remove the structure within 72 hours if I hadn't complied. He CC'd the entire board, painting me as an uncooperative employee who was abusing accommodations. His email claimed, "Miss Jenkins' service animal structure is merely a personal kennel, not a medical necessity, and violates our new community standards. We cannot allow exceptions for anyone, especially not an employee, or our new aesthetic vision will crumble. I have already consulted with legal counsel, and they assure me we are on firm ground." It was a lie. He had consulted no counsel other than his own ego. His final line to me, delivered in person in the community office, was chillingly confident. "Liaison, you either comply, or you're creating a hostile work environment for yourself. We are streamlining, modernizing. If you don't fit, you don't fit." He then added, "Consider it an opportunity to demonstrate your commitment to the new Oak Haven estates and your ability to adapt." He fully expected me to be crushed, to fall in line, to let Winston's protected accommodation be destroyed. He assumed I would cave, that I would be embarrassed into compliance. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. I stopped arguing. I went into read-only mode. My commitment to adapt would be complete. The demolition order was authorized by the HOA board, specifically by Thorne in his capacity as president. My attempts to provide documentation and legal counsel had been explicitly disregarded. This was no longer about a dog run. This was about exposing a systemic rot Thorne had deliberately created. I confirmed the demolition schedule with the maintenance crew manager, making sure they had the necessary equipment. I ensured that the directive was in writing, signed by Thorne, with specific instructions for how to remove the structure and where to dispose of the materials. Then I meticulously documented every single step. I took high-resolution, time-stamped photos of Winston's run from every angle. Its permits are fixed inside, its construction details matching the main house. I recorded my conversations with Thorne, subtly but clearly outlining the legal implications, his dismissals, and his explicit authorization for demolition. I reached out to my medical doctor, my service animal trainer, and a disability rights advocacy group, securing affidavits and formal letters of intent to pursue legal action should the run be removed. I contacted a structural engineer discreetly, under the guise of general property assessment, to examine my foundation where the run was attached. His findings were crucial. The run, while perfectly code-compliant and well-built, had been attached to a specific section of my home's foundation that had an obscure, non-obvious design flaw related to the original subslab drainage system installed by the developer decades ago. This flaw was known to be present in all homes built in the South Ridge section of Oakhaven during a specific construction period, before a design correction was issued. The run's minimal weight and careful construction had actually masked the issue, providing a slight structural brace. Removing it would not only expose the flaw, but could, in theory, accelerate localized settling if not handled precisely. The original developer, Evergreen Holdings, which Thorne had recently acquired a significant stake in, though it wasn't public, was liable for this original flaw under a long-expired warranty, but potentially under specific local consumer protection statutes for latent defects. I cross-referenced this with obscure clauses in the original Oakhaven Estates Master Development Agreement, Section 12 Roman 3, which stipulated mandatory structural assessments and remediation for latent defects in South Ridge foundations if a trigger event occurred during a modification, and an unapproved, developer-initiated modification, like Thorne forcing the removal, was explicitly one such trigger. I had all the paperwork, the original blueprints, the structural engineer's report, my personal property records, and the full legal opinion from the disability rights advocates. The trap was set. The demolition day arrived, a crisp Tuesday morning. Thorne made a point of being there, standing on my lawn in an expensive suit, supervising the crew with a smug grin. He clearly thought he was making a statement. Winston, safely inside with a trusted friend, whimpered slightly as the first panel was removed. I stood quietly, holding a tablet, recording everything, nodding politely to the crew foreman. Thorne walked over, hands clasped behind his back. "See, liaison, not so difficult, was it? Compliance is key to a harmonious community. Now, wasn't that better than fighting me?" I met his gaze evenly. "Mr. Thorne, you are directly authorizing the removal of a federally protected medical accommodation, bypassing due process and explicit legal warnings. This action is taken under your direct authority as HOA president." I held up my tablet, showing the time-stamped video of him issuing the directive. "You take full responsibility for the consequences." He scoffed. "Consequences? Please. It's a dog kennel. What are you going to do, sue for emotional distress over a few planks of wood?" He chuckled, gesturing to the crew. "Finish it up, boys. Let's get this eyesore gone." As the crew carefully detached the last supporting beam from the house foundation, there was a sickening crunch. A small section of the concrete foundation, where the run had been attached, visibly sagged inwards. A hairline crack spiderwebbed outwards across the exposed slab. The crew foreman, a grizzled veteran named Dave, immediately halted operations. Whoa, boss, hold up, this ain't right," Thorne scowled. "What now, Dave?" "Just finish the job," Dave pointed with a gloved finger. "Mr. Thorne, this foundation is compromised. That little dog run was actually bracing it. You removed it, and now we've got a structural failure. We can't proceed. This needs an immediate engineering assessment." This whole section of the South Ridge homes had known drainage issues in the original build. This looks like a direct result of that. Thorne's face went white. He spun towards me. What is he talking about? "Liaison, what is this?" I opened my tablet. "Mr. Thorne, as I documented in my memo dated 3 weeks ago, Section 12 Roman 3 of the Oakhaven Estates Master Development Agreement stipulates that any structural modification in the South Ridge section that triggers a latent foundation defect requires a community-wide structural integrity audit. That audit, in turn, if it finds systemic defects, triggers mandatory developer-funded remediation. Evergreen Holdings, the original developer, is liable. You, as HOA president, ordered this specific modification despite my warnings regarding structural concerns I discreetly raised, which are on record. He stammered. You knew, you let this happen. My role, Mr. Thorne, I said calmly, is to ensure compliance with all governing documents. When my warnings were disregarded and a direct, legally unsound order was issued, I documented. You ordered this removal. I maliciously complied. I displayed the structural engineer's report, the section of the master agreement, and the original blueprints, all neatly organized. The disability rights advocates will be filing an immediate Fair Housing Act violation, a separate action. But the foundation audit, which you just triggered, will be far more costly. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Within hours, city building inspectors were on site, alerted by Dave the foreman. The HOA was slapped with an emergency stop work order and a mandate for a full, independent structural audit of all South Ridge homes built before 1998. The preliminary estimates alone for the potential remediation, if the audit confirmed systemic issues, were astronomical tens of millions, possibly hundreds. Evergreen Holdings, the company Thorne was secretly buying into and attempting to protect by modernizing the community, was suddenly facing a catastrophic liability. Thorne tried to blame me, tried to claim I withheld information, but my meticulous, time-stamped documentation was irrefutable. Every email, every ignored memo, every recording of his dismissive orders, every single piece of evidence laid out his deliberate negligence and hubris. The disability rights advocates wasted no time, filing their Fair Housing Act lawsuit against the HOA, specifically naming Thorne for discrimination and retaliation. He was swiftly removed from the HOA board by an emergency vote. His new wealth and influence couldn't outrun the paper trail. Update 1, 3 weeks later. The full structural audit report came back. It confirmed what the engineer had found. Widespread, systemic latent defects in the subslab drainage systems and foundation work in over 150 homes in the South Ridge section. The total cost of remediation was estimated at an eye-watering $180 million. Evergreen Holdings, under immense pressure, had to declare bankruptcy to avoid the immediate legal fallout. The firm Thorne had invested heavily in, the one he was trying to clean up, was now utterly worthless. Update 2, 2 months later. The Fair Housing Act lawsuit settled. The HOA, now under interim management, had to pay a substantial sum, establish a robust disability accommodation policy, and fund an accessible modifications program for the entire community. Thorne was personally named in the lawsuit, and as part of the settlement, was ordered to pay a significant portion out of his personal assets. He was also formally censured and banned from holding any future positions on the Oakhaven Estates HOA board. His attempts to sue me for negligence were immediately thrown out, with the judge citing his repeated, willful disregard for documented warnings. Update 3, 6 months later. Thorne listed his ostentatious new construction for sale. The value of his property, along with all others in the South Ridge, had plummeted due to the ongoing foundation remediation work and the public scandal. He had bought high, ridden his ego even higher, and now was selling for a catastrophic loss. Last I heard, he's trying to offload it to a vulture fund, complaining bitterly about small-minded bureaucrats and unnecessary regulations. Winston and I still walk the grounds, and his run, rebuilt at the HOA's expense, is now a designated example of reasonable accommodation in our updated bylaws. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a loud voice, but a meticulously kept paper trail.